Hey everyone, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. And I wanted to do two videos on not outlining slash pantsing slash discovery writing because contentious topic. And so I wanted to film one video that was like a chill, like kind of discussion. I have a lot of things I want to say. I also wanted to film this video today where I talk about some tips that I have found really help me write a book without an outline. I wrote with an outline for a long time. It was a very important part of my process for a long time, but I switched back to discovery writing slash pantsing slash not outlining. I kind of prefer the term discovery writing. It's less negative and weird than pantsing. Anyways, pantsing, if you don't know, I think originates from flying by the seat of your pants. Anyways, I recently switched back to pantsing and I've had a lot of benefits from it. There are so many videos out there on how to outline your book, multiple of which I have made. No shade on outlining, like outlining was super important for my development as a writer, but lots of people benefit more from not outlining. So I wanted to share some tips. There's like this big misconception that like discovery writing is just a mess and it's a disaster and it's lazy, when anytime you're writing like 100,000 words, none of that is lazy. It's not lazy to not outline, you're just taking a different route based on kind of where your brain and your creativity is most ignited. So today I wanted to share 13 different tips, things that I think have kind of helped me as I've been venturing into discovery writing a book. Number one, write down everything. Write down every thought that comes to your mind. I have a document just called ideas, and in it I write down everything. Every possible line or quote, every possible scene idea, just literally anything. It could be an image. You want to start accumulating that material that you can look to for reference when you're stuck, and write it down in the same place. Like I said, I just have one document. Organize it how you will if you want to break it down like plot, character, whatever. It's kind of going to be your best tool for inspiring you. Try to figure out a way of organizing all your documents that works well for you. Staying as organized as possible is key. Keep your notes organized from the start rather than just letting them become a disaster, because that will be much harder for you to use. Before I get into the second point, this video is kind of a mix of process stuff and crafty stuff. For the process stuff, as always, take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is just what's helped me, but it won't necessarily help you. It might be worth a try. But there are lots of ways to approach writing a book and writing a book without outlining. I find that these things help, but everyone has a unique process. So number two is edit as you go. Now, for some people this does not work, and if you know it doesn't work for you, don't do it. But it has kind of been the best thing for me when discovery writing my book. Basically, by editing as you go, you fix problems as they appear and polish up the book as you go, so that by the end, you haven't really let any large-scale problems really develop to the point that they would be a big issue. This is kind of a way of course correcting, so you write a little bit and then you go back and you edit that to fix things like continuity, but also to iron out problems, just so that you fix them as soon as possible. I kind of see my forward motion through the book like this. So like I draft a little and then I jump back and edit. And then I go forward and then I jump back and edit. And I kind of keep doing this. So it's a slower drafting process, but it ends up with a much cleaner draft in the end. I know for some people it doesn't work because they get too caught up in editing that they can never move forward. But if it does work for you, it can kind of be a way of making up for the fact that you don't have a plan. Because you're going back once you've figured it out, you're just doing that piece by piece rather than with a large scale. Number three, know your key points and then bridge them. This is a good way of going if you like to have a little bit of the plot figured out, but not all of it. I know the key points along my timeline, including the book's climax. I just don't know everything that comes between. For me, this is easier than going ahead knowing nothing. Instead, knowing kind of like what I see as the cornerstone events that really hold up the plot, and then all you have to do is bridge them together. It's so much easier, in my opinion, to just have to work towards the next point in the distance than having to work towards the very end, which maybe you don't even know what it is. I think knowing a few key points, that could even just be like 6 things along your timeline that you know. I think it's kind of a good middle ground between a full outline and just complete discovery writing. Number 4, make your character act in every single chapter. So I talked a little bit about this in a writing vlog that I did, where I kind of talked about how I approach a chapter, and I wanted to talk about that more in like a formal sit-down video. So a good way to approach discovery writing is to always just keep in mind the fundamentals of what make a good story. One issue that can arise when you don't outline is the plot just gets very meandery because you don't know where you're going, so it just ends up with kind of a lot of wandering. And a lot of wandering often happens because the character isn't making, decisive actions and decisive choices. So what I like to do when I'm approaching every chapter that I'm writing is for my main character to act or make a decision in every single chapter. This is a good way of keeping your character basically being a worthy protagonist. Always just think, what's the next thing I can do to make them act? A lot of people also run into the issue is that they just don't know what to make happen. Rather than trying to think of the next problem you can throw at your character, try to think about the next choice or action your character can make. That will lead you to much stronger character work and stronger plot work, because throwing a lot of random problems at the character can feel very arbitrary. When I was young, and 13, I started out writing by discovery writing. The first few novels I wrote, I did not outline, and I didn't really know much about writing at the time, so when I didn't know what would happen, I would throw a problem at the character rather than thinking about it in terms of what can my character do on the plot, and so it always felt very arbitrary. If you're getting your character to act, it will all be feeding into your character's goal, which is the main thread of the plot, rather than if you're thinking, what can I throw at the character? That can feel random, and it doesn't necessarily increase the tension from what came before. Going to be the difference between a character-driven narrative and a plot-driven narrative. Number 4, see every chapter as a short story. This is very different from when I used to outline. When I used to outline, I wasn't very good at my chapter. I thought of the chapter in a very different way. When I would outline, I didn't really think of the core concept of my chapter. When I was making my outline, I would just group scenes into chapters based on kind of what made sense for there to be a break. I kind of thought of my chapters as more of a tool for readability than kind of like an entity, an arc of themselves. And there are lots of different ways to approach chapters. There's not one way to group your book into chapters, especially if you are discovery writing. You can use chapters as a tool to really increase the structure of your book. So I do view each of my chapters as kind of a short story. This partly comes from the fact that I have a background in short fiction. For me, that's like an easy way to see things. And the way I kind of see each of my chapters is each chapter includes these components. So first is the plot arc, which is kind of just what happens, and I want it to feel complete. If you were to end your chapters with a cliffhanger, you would end kind of at the start of the arc rather than the end. Personally, my book is literary fiction. I'm not necessarily trying to go for cliffhangers, so I usually end at the clean end of the arc rather than a little offset, but if you're going for more suspense, you might end it a little offset. And then the second thing that I include is the trigger for the next chapter. Fairly obvious, even though I do view these as short stories, it does need a lead into the next chapter, of course, because it's not like a contained short story. It is part of a bigger arc. I just kind of view the structure as being like a short story. And then the third thing it includes is the core action that my character makes that moves the plot forward. So I want to have her act in a way that changes the course of the plot in every single chapter. Doing so just makes sure that there's always a purpose. Again, it can become an issue if you're not outlining to have extraneous scenes. Viewing it in this way has kind of made it so that I have been avoiding extraneous scenes much better than when I used to outline. I actually had more of a problem with extraneous scenes when I would outline because I think I've talked about this before, but sometimes when you're outlining you think you're gonna need multiple scenes, but then really you kind of do the work of multiple scenes in one scene. I don't have an outline. I think because I'm building the story as I go, I've been very purposeful and you know what you need in that moment. So thinking of it in terms of action can really help you avoid the passive character and the redundant scene. And then the last thing my chapters include is kind of an ideological arc or like a thematic arc. Now, I don't worry about this too much. I just kind of view it as like there's a central idea that is being explored in the chapter, and that's usually kind of what I name the chapter after. It's not something I really worry about. It's usually just something that kind of appears that gives the chapter the feeling of a full arc. If you prefer a style of shorter chapters, you can also kind of spread that arc over multiple chapters. Maybe say like 3 chapters together are kind of a short story, because I know a lot of authors like shorter chapters might just want to take the same principle and just kind of view like a few chapters together as an arc. Number 6, outline as you go. I talked a little bit about this in the video where I talked about my process for discovery writing a novel. I'll leave a link to that in the cards if I haven't already. I probably linked that like right at the start of the video. What I mean by that is after I write a chapter, I go add it to my outline. Now, the reason I do this is just because I think it will be very useful for revision purposes, and I've already found it pretty useful for revision purposes. I find it's pretty useful to just have a list of every scene that takes place, what chapter it's in, and especially for the timeline, to see where things were taking place on the timeline. So I just kind of have an outline document. I don't worry about it that much, but just every chapter or every couple chapters, I go and update it with the new stuff I've written. I find it's been very useful for revision when I'm trying to go back and revise, because like I said, I edit as I go, to be able to look at the structure and find out where I might want to add stuff. Number 7, have a side project. Now again, this might not work for everyone, but I think if you were discovery writing, it's especially helpful to have something that's going to give you a break. When you're writing a book from an outline, you always know what the next scene is going to be. Like, that's really the best part about outlining, is you're not going to have writer's block, because you know what happens, because it's all planned out already. When you're discovery writing, there are probably going to be points in time where you hit a block and you don't know what happens next. And I think it's fairly useful to, instead of just taking a break from writing, have a side project you can work on. Now, the risk for some people is if they start another novel, they will abandon the first novel. That's why I think short form things are really useful. I find that oftentimes writing something else kind of refreshes my writer brain, and then I can come back and work through the block easier than if I had just taken a break from writing entirely. Number 8, create forces that move the story forward naturally. Now the thing is, if your story has the forces that create natural momentum, it will keep moving. This is, I actually think, one of the benefits to discovery writing versus outline. Sometimes when you outline, you end up kind of muscling the story forward or forcing the story forward when your story doesn't actually have these natural forces of momentum. Whereas if you're discovery writing, muscling it forward is going to be so much harder. If you're missing these qualities, it'll be much easier to pinpoint. What I mean by like muscling the story forward is like, say you have an outline, but you're really actually lacking in goals, conflict, and tension, which are basically these forces of momentum in the story. Because you know what happens, you can kind of just keep forcing the story forward even though you don't actually have the building blocks that make a story move. But if you're not outlining, it's going to be pretty obvious that your story's not working because you're not going to be able to get it to move. Whereas if you have these natural forces of momentum, the story will kind of feel like it's writing itself a lot more. Like, of course there will be times where you'll hit a bit of a wall, but for the most part, it'll just be easier to write because it'll have the qualities that make a story move. If you have conflict, goals, stakes, and tension, those are the things that will keep the ball rolling. Number 9, think of causality. Causality is basically seeing your story as a chain of events that are all linked. So they all cause each other. Causality is kind of cause and effect, and it's a key component of a strong plot. So if you don't know what happens, always think back to causality and ask yourself, based on what just happened, or what's going to happen, what has to happen? Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know what happens, and then I just stop and I go, okay, but what has to happen? You have events that came before, and assuming you have those natural elements of story momentum, like I just talked about, something is going to happen. If not, were there no consequences? Like, always think about the consequences of the last story beat and how you can explore them. Number 10, get feedback as you go, if you can. I say if you can because this is a bad practice for a lot of people. I didn't think I would put this in here because in a lot of cases I don't like getting feedback as I go. Sometimes if I get feedback as I go, it makes me kind of overthink the story too much, and then I don't want to write it because I just get caught up in how many problems there are. I was writing my novel for a class, and so I had workshop feedback during the middle of writing the book. It was actually extremely helpful. Like I was talking about at the beginning, edit as you go, it really helped me fix problems now rather than having to fix them when I was done the whole draft, which would have been a lot more difficult. Even if you don't want to get feedback throughout the whole book, if you can just get feedback on the beginning, say the first couple chapters, that's probably the most important place to get feedback. If you have problems in Act 3, the root is probably in Act 1. Act 1 is where you need to establish everything properly, and if you do that well, you'll probably be, for the most part, relatively smooth sailing. Feedback on the beginning is going to identify whether or not you have those forces of story momentum like I was talking about. Goals, conflict, stakes, tension. And it might also give you some ideas on where to take the story that maybe you didn't have before. Number 11, be intuitive until your intuition fails you. I don't think it's bad to rely on your intuition. If you have an intuition for the story, follow that. Sometimes you might be like, I feel like this is what I have to do with the story. I'm not entirely sure why yet. Writing it will help you uncover why you feel like that needs to be that way. But there are going to be times where your intuition fails you, and be prepared to deal with it. So in my case, most of my characters came to life very vividly in the way that I wanted them to. They clicked into place. I could really feel them on the page. I could really see them on the page. I really just understood them right away. But there were two characters in my book that did not happen for. I wrote the beginning and I was like, I don't really get these characters. And the more I kept writing, I continued to just not get them. I eventually just sat down and did manual character development work. I filled out character profiles. I did some exercises that I think helped me. I don't usually do manual character development work. I don't usually fill out the character profiles. I don't usually do that kind of stuff. In the cases where your intuition just hits a wall, be prepared to do a bit of manual work and do it as soon as possible. Stop and fix problems as they come up. If your intuition is hitting a wall, stop, fix the problem rather than just kind of ignoring it and continuing to write, because the problem's only going to get bigger and be harder to fix the longer you go. Number 12, again, this is just something that helped me. It's kind of small, but breaking the book into parts. I never broke my book into parts before. I was never one to do that. And even if you do this, you don't necessarily have to have it divided in parts in the actual manuscript, but just in your mind. I first started seeing my book as 4 parts. Now, in the actual manuscript, it's in 2 parts, but at the beginning, I could kind of see it as 4 main arcs. So I could kind of see these 4 main arcs that I was working towards, and it made it much easier to envision the story in my mind, even though I didn't have everything planned out, because I could see it in these smaller arcs. And my last tip is not really a tip, but just embrace what the lack of outlining can do for your story. There's so much just like shitting on pantsing. Don't worry about the people who don't write this way. Like, everyone should just write how they want to write. If you get the book done in the end and it's a quality that you're happy with, that's really all that matters. Don't feel bad that you don't outline. Again, outlining is great, but if you don't want to outline because outlining doesn't work for you, don't feel bad about it. Embrace the fact that this can do good things for your story. You don't even have to feel like this is a worse way to write, but it's what works for me. Like, there are benefits to discovery writing. This can give a really organic quality to your work. Let your characters surprise you. That is all I had to say on how I write a book without outlining. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I will see you in another video.